A Tale of Two Cities. Introduction. Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is one of the world's most famous writers. His novels are still very popular and are read today both in English and in many different translations. Many of his stories have been made into successful television programs and films. Dickens was born in Portsmouth, England on 7th of February 1812. He was the second of 8 children. At the age of 12, he was sent out to work in a factory after his father was imprisoned for debt. His experiences during this period haunted him for the rest of his life and provided much inspiration for his writing. When he was 15, he began work as a clerk in a lawyer's office, but he wanted a different career. A year later, he started working as a reporter. In 1833, he started to write fiction. Dickens's novels appeared in magazines in monthly installments. The first installment of the Pickwick Papers was published in 1836. Dickens wrote about the poor and the lower classes in the way that was quite new at the time. The 19th century was a time of great change and upheaval. The Industrial Revolution had brought great technological developments and made Britain one of the richest nations in the world. But it had also brought poverty and misery for the lower classes, as child labor, long working hours, low wages, and slums were all features of this time. Dickens's sympathy for the poor, especially children, is evident in much of his work. In his novels, he explores the worlds of crime, punishment, and the law, and he attracts injustice in institutions such as schools and workhouses, where people were often treated very badly. Many of Dickens's characters have become household names. Characters like Little Nell, the convict Magwitch, and the infamous Scrooge. Similarly, many of his sayings and phrases have entered the English language, such as the opening lines of A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and Oliver Twist asking, "Please, sir, I want some more." Dickens's strengths as a writer include his astonishing powers of observation, his ability to evoke laughter and tears, and his positive message of hope and love. His novels are full of unbelievable coincidences, but the power of the action, the richness of the descriptions, and the strength of the emotions all make the reader forget or forgive these coincidences. A Tale of Two Cities. Some of Dickens's novels are given the name of the hero of the story: Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Nicholas Nickleby, the Pickwick Papers. The title of A Tale of Two Cities suggests that the story is about more than the fortunes of one person. But the story is not really about the two cities, London and Paris. The cities are simply symbols of two different worlds. London represents peace and order, and Paris the breakdown of law and order. In fact, A Tale of Two Cities is the story of individuals who are caught in a great event that is beyond their control. Perhaps the story doesn't have the name of a hero because there's more than one. If a hero is a good man, then the hero is Charles Darnay. He's an idealistic young Frenchman who has given up his right to be an aristocrat. He hates the cruelty, oppression, and corruption of his uncle and other French aristocrats. Charles Darnay moves to London to live, but because Britain and France are enemies, He is suspected of being a French spy. When he returns to France, he is suspected of being an enemy of the new revolutionary government. He is caught between two hostile worlds. But A Tale of Two Cities is not simply the story of one good man. There's at least one other hero, and this is Sidney Carton. Carton is not typically heroic. He's lazy, he wastes his life, and he generally doesn't behave well. He is not an attractive person to the reader, and yet, as the story reaches its powerful end, you may think that Carton is the true hero of this novel. Like many of Dickens's stories, A Tale of Two Cities is full of strange coincidences, but this doesn't seem to matter. It is full of exciting action and drama that keeps the reader turning the pages until the very last word. Symbolism in A Tale of Two Cities. A Tale of Two Cities is rich with symbolism. The red wine that spills from the broken cask outside Monsieur de Varges' wine shop, for example, symbolizes the blood that will be spilt in the coming revolution. The frenzy of the people scrambling to drink the wine from the street is an indication of the more dangerous unrest to come. The violent storm that breaks when Carton and Darnay are visiting the Manet's house can also be seen to symbolize the coming turmoil in France. The echoing footsteps of people hurrying to shelter from the storm foreshadow the chaos and desperation that will engulf the main characters in the story. Madame de Varges, quietly and remorselessly knitting her register of those who are to die, symbolizes fate silently driving the revolution and history onwards. This use of symbolism serves to underline the themes of violence, fate, sacrifice, and resurrection which run through the novel. The period. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. France in the year 1775 was a society of extremes. A privileged few possessed great wealth, but for the most people, life was very hard. The King Louis XVI sat at the top of the country's social hierarchy. Below him were the nobility, rich families who owned large amounts of land and whose members occupied the highest positions in the government. The great majority of the population were peasants, farm workers, who lived in miserable poverty and had no influence on the way the country was run. They didn't own the land they worked on, but rented it from nobles. They were also obliged to pay heavy taxes. The cities were places of great squalor, and life for the poor there was no better than it was in the country. This social order had changed little for many years, but the grievances of the poor were soon to find expression in the violence and passion of the French Revolution. The characters in the story: Alexander Manet, a doctor, French; Lucy Manet, his daughter, French; later, Lucy Darnay; Charles Darnay, an aristocrat, French, also called Charles Evermond; Sidney Carton, a lawyer, English; Jarvis Lorry, a banker and friend to the Manets, English; Miss Pross, a servant to the Manets, English; Jerry Cruncher, an employee of Tellson's Bank, English; Mr. Stryver, a lawyer, English; Ernest de Varges, a wine shop keeper, French; Thérèse de Varges, his wife, French; John Parsad, a spy, English; Robert Cly, a spy, English; Marquis Evermond, Charles Darnay's uncle, French; Gaspard, a friend of the de Varges, French; Théophile Gabelle, a servant to the Marquis, French. The road repairer, a man from the village near the Marquis's chateau, French, later called the wood cutter. The Vengeance, a friend of Madame de Varges, French. Chapter 1. The Times. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the time of belief and the time of disbelief. It was the season of light and the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We were all going directly to heaven. We were all going directly the other way. There was a king with a large jaw and a queen with a plain face on the throne of England. There was a king with a large jaw and a queen with a fair face on the throne of France. In both countries, it was clearer than crystal that things in general were settled forever. It was the year 1775. France rolled with great smoothness downhill, making paper money and spending it. Such human achievements as sentencing a youth to have his hands cut off, his tongue torn out with pincers, and his body burned alive were commonplace. It is likely that in the woods of France, trees were growing when that youth was put to death, already marked by fate to be cut down and made into boards for a certain movable machine with a giant knife that would be terrible in history. It is likely enough that in the outhouses of farms near Paris there were rough carts covered with mud, snuffed about by farm animals and roosted in by hens and chickens, which death had already set apart to be his timbrels of the revolution. But fate and death, although they work ceaselessly, work silently, and no one heard them as they went about their business with quiet steps. England had little or no order and protection to justify any national pride. Daring robberies by armed men took place in houses and on highways, took place in the capital itself every night. The highwayman in the dark was a tradesman in the light. The mail was attacked by 7 robbers. The guard shot 3 dead and then got shot dead by the other 4. The great Lord Mayor of London was held up by highway robbers just outside London while his guards looked on. Prisoners in jail fought battles with their jailers. Thieves cut diamond jewels from round the necks of people at court, and nobody thought any of these things out of the ordinary. All these things and 1,000 like them came to pass in and close upon the year 1775.